Hello and welcome back to Over My Dead Pod. I'm Kylie Caldwell.
And this is Kate Carter.
Switched up the story I was going to do. Originally, I found a little criminal couple in Myrtle Beach and I started researching it, but then there was more developments and I was like, okay, this is still ongoing. We'll put that on the back burner.
Yeah.
But I found another case, another criminal couple in Myrtle Beach.
Okay, so I mean, you and I know this, but our listeners might not. Myrtle Beach,
Dirty Myrtle.
Dirty Myrtle is what it's called. It's in South Carolina if you don't know where it is, but it's kind of on the border of South Carolina and North Carolina. And if you're in high school, that's where you go to party with your friends.
That is where these shenanigans occur in the South.
Yes, the illegal, the sketchy, the southern, you want redneck, you go to Myrtle Beach.
Yes, if you can't
So
make it all the way down to Daytona, you stop in Myrtle Beach.
yeah. So, okay, Myrtle. So I'm not surprised that you found two murderous couples.
So, as we know, today's story takes place in Myrtle Beach and revolves around the life of Heather Elvis, a very young woman whose life was just getting started when she found herself in some trouble. Let's get into it. So, Heather Elvis was born on June 30th, 1994, to parents Terry and Debbie. She was a middle sister. She had a younger sister, Morgan, and an older brother, Christopher. She was born and raised in Carolina Forest, which is just like inland of Myrtle Beach, like just the town in. She was known to be shy, but very passionate and friendly once she opened up to people. When Heather wasn't volunteering at the local church daycare or in orphanages abroad, she was really into makeup. It was her dream to become a professional makeup artist. So when she graduated from high school in 2011, she began working as a hostess at two restaurants in town, and she was going to cosmetology school during the day. So she worked at the Tilted Kilt, which, if you don't know, is kind of like a Hooters, bras, little shorts. And then she also worked at the House of Blues, which is like a concert venue slash restaurant. Heather was known to be very on top of it. She's very responsible. She's got her shit together. She's always on time. You get the gist. So things are going well. And then one day at work, she met a man. This was at Tilted Kilt. His name is Sidney Moorer. He owned a maintenance company in town and he serviced restaurant equipment. So that's why he was there. And immediately, Heather had a crush on him, told all her friends, told all the coworkers. But there was an issue. Heather was 20 at the time and Sydney was 37. An even bigger issue was the fact that Sydney was married and had two children.
Okay. Yeah. It's the whole marriage and kid thing. Yeah, that's kind of a bad thing too.
Yeah, but this didn't deter either of them because at some point after meeting in June of 2013, an affair began. So we aren't entirely sure when their relationship began, but we can kind of just go off of Heather's tweets because, Twitter was big at the time. She tweeted everything. In July, she tweeted she was into the guy who builds things at her job, and she tweeted, quote, "One of these days I will drag that man into the mop closet and have my way with him. Lord have mercy," end quote,
Wait, wait, wait. She put that where?
on Twitter.
Okay. All right.
On July 10th, she tweeted, quote, "Baby did a bad thing," end quote, and quote, "I'm in way too deep, but watch me get in deeper," end quote. And soon after this, she changed her relationship status on Facebook to into a relationship.
Okay. So she a naughty girl.
She's a little freaky.
She knows what she's doing, and she's also publicly posting about it.
Yes. So based off her social media posts, I'm assuming they met May, June. It really kind of started in July when they started hooking up. So it was also pretty passionate and intense, according to everyone. Even when Sydney wasn't there repairing stuff, he would just stop by at Tilted Kilt to bring her coffee and bagels. Heather did discuss their relationship with her friends, but we really don't know like how often they saw each other, or where they met up, and yada yada. I believe Heather was living with her parents at the time, and then Sydney, of course, was living in a home with his wife and children. So we do know that this relationship ended sometime in September of 2013. Heather tweeted, quote, "Once upon a time, an angel and a devil fell in love. It did not end well," end quote. So you may be wondering about Sydney's wife. Her name is Tammy. And Tammy actually found out about the affair after it ended in October. So obviously, she was very angry. And when she confronted Sydney, he gave the typical man response, It didn't mean nothing to me. It was just hookups. But Tammy went full on berserk. She began using Sydney's phone to call Heather and harass her, calling her terrible names, threatening to beat her up, saying she was going to be taking her last breath soon. Tammy also started to text her photos of Tammy and Sydney having sex. And it gets weirder, surprisingly. In order to stop Sydney from seeing Heather, Tammy started to handcuff him to the bed at night so he wouldn't sneak out.
Okay. So she is just as crazy, maybe crazier, but she's also married to the man and has kids. This is, I feel like I already know where the story might be going.
She does more. Tammy does more.
Okay.
She changed his phone password, didn't tell him what the password was. Eventually, she just took his phone altogether. So he didn't have a phone. He wasn't allowed to go anywhere without Tammy, even to work. She made Sydney get her name tattooed above his crotch.
Okay. So marking territory.
Yes.
But here's the thing, he went and did it.
Apparently, he was allegedly okay with it because he wanted to save his marriage. So he's like, okay, I'll agree to all these weird conditions, I guess.
Yeah. If your 30, 40-year-old something husband is cheating with a 20-year-old, I feel like this is just, honey, you got to get out of the situation, Miss Tammy.
See, I was thinking when I found out about the tattoo part, it would be really funny to make my husband get that tattoo and then immediately
And
divorce
then
him.
dump him. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree.
But they stay together, of course. So it's been over about a month since this affair ended. Sydney's no longer in contact with Heather because he literally doesn't have a phone, and Tammy is always with him. But Tammy kept harassing Heather. She kept texting and calling not only her, but also her job. Tammy would call the Tilted Kilt multiple times a day to say her husband would no longer work there and repair their stuff as long as Heather was employed there. And she would call so often that the restaurant had to cut Heather's hours because it was just like fucking up the whole ecosystem of the restaurant. Then on November 5th, Heather retweeted a joke from comedian Daniel Tosh that said, quote, "Hey married fellas, you can either cheat on your wife or murder her. Never both. That's when you get caught." End quote.
Okay. All right, Daniel Tosh. First of all, shout out to Daniel Tosh. We all grew up with him. Is this maybe, what is it, foreshadowing the upcoming situation?
Perhaps you will have to keep listening.
Okay. Okay.
So on November 19th, Sydney, Tammy, and their two kids left South Carolina and headed to Disney World, and things died down. The texts and the calls stopped. Heather also finally started to move on and work on herself. She moved out of her parents' house and into an apartment with her coworker and friend Bree. She and Bree started going to church together regularly, something Heather hadn't done in a while. Heather also had gotten her first job at a salon, and she was set to start right before Christmas. But then there was an issue. Heather's friends and coworkers noticed that Heather was putting on a lot of weight. Her bra size had gone up 3 sizes in a pretty short amount of time.
Well, I don't know what that could mean.
Okay, so you may think it's weird that they know her bra size is going up, but like at the Tilted Kilt, they wear bras and it's
Right.
part of their uniform. So
But
every
you also will know, like,
yeah,
you, girl to girl, if your boobs have even grown a size bigger, your
yeah,
friends are gonna know.
yeah. And Heather was 5'1" also.
Oh,
So
she's
she's
tiny.
tiny. So it was pretty noticeable.
Yeah.
So her manager was like, okay, you keep asking for like a bigger bra size every 2 weeks. Are you pregnant? And the manager gave her a pregnancy test to take at work. It came back as an error.
Okay, wait. Her manager at work gave her a pregnancy test. Was this like mandatory? Because that's crazy.
I don't think so. I think they were just like, I think it was just like a friendly thing.
And she never thought to take one. Maybe I don't know. We won't know, obviously,
Oh
because it
no.
was in her head. But it came back error.
Yes. And as far as we know, Heather did not take another one.
Okay. So for everyone that's listening, because I learned about this when I first tested positive on a pregnancy stick, boy, oh boy, was I shocked. But I also then went and took 8 more. So I took as many as possible because I was in all different brands because I was like making sure, I had to
Oh,
I
yeah.
had to test it all. And then I eventually find out from my OBGYN, there can only be false negative.
Good to know.
So
Good
if
to know.
you ever see a positive, it's not, you're 100% pregnant. There's no not chance. But if you see a negative, sometimes it can be a false. So that's why they always say take more than one. But when it comes to error on the screen, you're doing the like, the digital blue tests or whatever that have the words on there.
Mhm.
Error usually falls on the side of you're pregnant.
I think also they expired, don't they?
They
Like
do.
it could have
Yeah.
been expired, that's why. So we don't know if she took another one because only a few days later, on December 18th, 2013, Heather Elvis went missing and has not been seen since. On the 17th, Heather stopped at her parents' house to grab some mail and she hung out for a bit. Around 7 p.m., she headed out on a first date with a guy named Steven. Afterwards, they drove around town looking at the Christmas lights before finding an empty parking lot where Steven taught her how to drive his manual truck. Heather actually sent photos of her driving the truck to her dad and to the friend Bree, who was out of town. Steven dropped Heather off at her apartment in Carolina Forest around 1:15 a.m. Only 20 minutes after getting home, Heather got a phone call from a payphone, and the call lasted about 5 minutes. She immediately called Bree to tell her what had just happened. Sydney had called and said he was leaving his wife and he wanted to meet up right now. Bree told investigators that Heather was hysterical, obviously. The call only lasted 2 minutes, and Heather was crying while Bree was pleading with her not to meet up with him again.
I want to ask you a question. When
Mhm.
he called to say that he's splitting things off with his wife and they need to meet up right now, was he actually doing that or was his wife telling him to do that? Like say that on the phone?
You'll find out.
Oh, great story. Great story. Okay.
So the next day, Heather's dad, Terry, was starting to get concerned. Heather wasn't answering any calls, which wasn't like her. He called the police, but they had actually just located Heather's car. Her green Dodge Intrepid was found parked perpendicular at the Peachtree Landing boat launch on the Waccamaw River, about 8 miles from her apartment. Terry went with police to the car, which was locked, but Terry had an extra set of keys. Once inside, police found Heather's keys, purse, and phone, hence why she wasn't answering any calls. So at this point, no one seems to be too concerned. I don't know their thought like she drove to work or she got a ride to work with somebody. There was really no reason for her car to be there. Like, I don't think she was known to go to the boat launch.
Right.
But
But in this situation too, do we know like were they already in contact with Bree? Because Bree could have been like, oh yeah, like she might have just met up with this man instead.
no, no one's
Okay.
talked to Bree yet. And I don't know if Heather told Bree that she wasn't going to go.
Oh, okay. Okay. So the police at this point and people were just like, oh, she's probably fine. Her car's just here.
Yeah, with all her stuff, weird. But so
Yeah.
they let the dad, Terry, drive the car back. And so then he's like, okay, maybe she's at work or something. Maybe she is at her apartment. So he calls to the two restaurants. She's not there. He goes to her apartment. No one's there. So then he calls the police back and he's like, okay, something's up. And then they officially classed Heather Elvis as a missing person. So the first person they want to talk to is obviously Steven, the guy she went on the date with the night before. He was cleared pretty instantly. He voluntarily took a polygraph. He handed over his phone. He had alibis, all that. So while investigators are talking to people in Heather's life, others are searching on the ground and near the river. They actually searched alongside and on the riverbed for miles in each direction. On the 21st, the Center for Missing Persons joined in on the search and helped to get the word out. The same day, Heather's family created the Find Heather Elvis Facebook page, announcing a $1,000 reward for any information. The next night, the family held a vigil, and with community support, the reward rose to $10,000, and a few days later to $30,000. Christmas came and went with nothing, no clue as to where Heather could be. Then came New Year's, and on the 1st, bones were found in the area of the boat launch. But they weren't Heather's. The bones were pretty quickly determined to be male, and then later in July, the bones were determined to have been belonging to a man named David Mino, who had gone missing in the area in 2011.
And they just randomly showed up in the same area
Yes.
and it wasn't noticed before.
No. So I couldn't find like any information on David Mino. There was like one news article saying they identified the remains as his, but that the case was still under investigation, like to the manner and cause of death, and nothing since then. So
Yeah, that is weird.
back to the story. After a few weeks of Heather being reported missing, police were able to obtain her phone records and analyze security footage in the area. By now, they had found out all about the affair with Sydney and the harassment from Tammy, so they're like, okay, we need to track their movements as well. As we know, Heather received that call from the payphone around 1:35 a.m. and immediately called Bree. After this call, Heather's phone wasn't used until 2:30 when she tried to call the payphone back, but there was no answer. Her phone pinged at Longbeard's Bar and Grill a few miles away and stayed there for about 15 minutes. The phone then traveled 4 miles toward August Plantation Drive before turning around and heading back to the bar and grill, staying there for another 15 minutes. There, Heather called Sydney's cell phone, and that went unanswered. 5 minutes later, the phone pinged back at her apartment. Once there, Heather called his cell phone again, and this time he picked up, and the call lasted around 4 minutes. At 3:37 a.m., Heather's phone pinged at Peachtree Landing, the boat launch where her car would later be found. A minute later, she called Sydney's cell 3 more times in a 3 minute span, and all these calls went unanswered. And that was the last ping from her phone. My opinion is he calls her from the payphone. He tells her to meet him at the Longbeard Bar and Grill. She goes there, she waits 15 minutes. He's not there. So she starts to drive back to her apartment and then changes her mind, goes back, waits another 15 minutes. Was like, okay, he's not showing up. Goes back to her apartment, finally gets a hold of him, and then he's like, okay, actually meet me at boat launch.
I feel like that's most likely what happened for
Yeah.
sure. I am shooketh that she would do that, but also not because you do weird things for love, and especially if you're maybe pregnant. But I also agree. I think that's exactly how the timeline unfolded that night.
Sydney's phone was later examined and he made no other calls or text. So since November 2nd. So I guess that's the date his phone was taken by Tammy. He had no other calls, texts, didn't respond to anything until that night, the 18th.
Yeah.
Since Sydney and Tammy are already on police's radar, they were able to track Sydney's truck using CCTV footage. On December 18th at 1:12 a.m., just 3 minutes before Heather was dropped back off at her apartment, Sydney and Tammy were spotted pulling into and parking in a handicap spot at the local Walmart.
Oh, oh, oh. What do we think about handicap spots?
You know what I think?
And I think the opposite. Was it an emergency that they needed to park in the handicap spot? Probably not.
He was in there longer than I would say it's allowed.
Okay.
Okay.
That just shows you.
So he was inside for 7 minutes. He headed straight to the pregnancy test, bought him, went to that little front desk where they sell the cigars and cigarettes, bought him a pack of cigars.
Okay.
He then, at 1:35 a.m., was spotted at that gas station making that payphone call. A dark Ford F-150 matching the general description of his truck was spotted on footage between his house and Peachtree Landing. It was later seen turning around, going the opposite direction, and then back to the boat launch. During the initial investigation, detectives weren't able to determine the license plate or be able to see it. But they later sent the footage to the FBI and they enhanced it somehow, and they confirmed it was Sydney's F-150.
It always blows my mind when people think that they're not going to be seen doing stuff. You're going to be seen somewhere. You're going to be seen somewhere.
I feel like the majority of houses have a Ring camera.
I would feel weird if I didn't have one.
Ring, if you want to sponsor the podcast,
We love you
we do.
and we support you.
So we now have our first arrest or two arrests. On January 28th, 2014, police arrested and charged William Christopher Barrett and Garrett Ryan Starnes with obstruction of justice.
Okay. Wait. Okay. All
You
right.
haven't heard these names.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute. Did I miss a part? Did I blank out for a second and miss a part of the story?
These guys apparently were posting online, like on Facebook, and then like on Heather's, like find Heather's page, and then they were sending tips to police that police looked into, and all of these tips were knowingly false.
Like very obviously false, like purposefully done.
I don't know. One of the guys, I couldn't remember which one, is actually friends with the Elvis family, but
Oh.
I don't know. I couldn't figure out what they were saying or where they were pointing fingers to, but police were fed up with their shenanigans and
Mm.
they're like, "You're wasting our time and money." They were indicted, they posted bond, but then the charges were later dismissed because the charging officer missed one of the hearings because he thought it was on a different date.
The amount of times that actually happens kind of blows my mind.
It does. So we have more drama. Sydney was brought in for a formal interrogation. He was shown the phone pings and calls, but his excuse was like, their data's wrong. Like, that can't be. Sydney later admitted that he was, in fact, at Peachtree Landing early that morning because him and Tammy were having sex in his truck. His
Ah.
story was that they were trying to have another child and
Mm.
they went and bought the pregnancy test. It was negative. So they're like, we'll try again right now. Sydney also denied calling Heather both on his cell phone and from the payphone. He didn't admit the truth until he was shown the security footage of himself at the gas station
Mm.
making that call. His
Yeah.
reason for calling Heather was that she had been leaving harassing notes on his car and he had only called to tell her to leave him alone.
Did he have these harassing notes to show police?
Nope.
Yep. Okay.
He did admit to the affair, but said it was only going on in September, and Tammy wasn't even that mad because they had an open marriage, and she had a little boyfriend as well.
Mm.
Sydney and Tammy, I don't know, they go on this tangent that Heather's the one that's been harassing them the whole time. They made a bunch of posts on Facebook and in comments detailing this supposed harassment. There's a bunch of posts Tammy made, but the big one that she posted in February of 2014 reads, quote, "Well, Sydney cheated on me in the months of September, October with a psycho whore who has since went missing, and now her crazy daddy is threatening to kill my children in Sydney, therefore making Sydney stupid. This girl grabbed his business card out of the office at her workplace and had fantasies about him as far back as March, but talked about it in July. I don't know any other word to describe my husband at this point. All you have to do is research this girl's Twitter. Although 4 months of it has gone missing in the past couple weeks, and her Tumblr to see what a twisted person she truly is. I could care less seeing that I had a boyfriend of my own for the past couple years, but when someone brings my children into this scenario, it's a whole other story. I will not tolerate anyone hurting my children because my husband banged a hoe 3 times in the backseat of her car and nothing more. I could care less what he screwed around with, but the fact that this jerk is stalking my family is unacceptable." End quote.
This was posted on like Facebook?
Yes, publicly.
Dude, I fucking love Facebook. This is just it's for people like this.
Yes. So their story is Heather was harassing them and now she's gone missing. Now her dad and his family's harassing them. No substance to any of this. But Sydney also reported straight to the police that he was being harassed. He claimed that people were following him, brandishing their guns at him, shooting at his truck, and killing and mutilating their family pets.
Do we have proof of this?
No, police go take a quick little look.
Yeah.
All the family pets are alive. Fine. Not a single bullet hole in his truck.
Why you got to bring the pets into it? You know, like
I'm glad they didn't kill the pets.
yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's what I was going to ask is did they kill their own pets and
So the Elvis family also reported being harassed by Sydney and Tammy. In one instance, Harry said 2 men in a black Jeep drove by him at work and yelled, quote, "Heather was first, Morgan is next," end quote. And Morgan is Heather's little sister, by the way. There's no footage of this, so kind of a dead end. But like people on both sides were just going back and forth at each other online and then also complaining that the other one's harassing them. So after all this shenanigans, investigators are like, okay, we gotta crack down on Sydney and Tammy. And on February 21st, 2014, the area around their house was shut down and they executed a search warrant on the house. Search took 11 hours, and fun fact, the house was apparently disgusting. There was like rotting and moldy meat and trash everywhere, plus a bunch of guns.
I feel like I could have seen that coming.
They're trash people.
They're-
So
yeah. I could have seen that. And 11 hours is nuts
for one house.
for one house. Yeah.
After the search concluded, thank God, both Sydney and Tammy were arrested for murder, kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and 2 counts of indecent exposure.
Okay, hold up. A lot to unpack in those charges. So when the police left the house after their search warrant, that's when the two of them got arrested.
Immediately.
Okay, so there was obviously quite a lot of evidence in their house of kidnapping, murder. What'd you say? Murder?
Yeah.
We're talking about murder. And then also indecent exposure. So indecent exposure, they either did it to the police while the police were there or pictures, videos.
Yes.
Okay.
They found photos and videos of them two going at it in public, which I didn't know you could
Oh,
get
in
indecent
public
exposure
after the fact.
from the photos.
No, because those are yours.
If no one was exposed, was I exposing?
You wouldn't have known unless you did a search warrant on my house. I don't know. That is a weird one. That's a weird one.
I guess fun fact, I mean, watch yourself, guys, if you're doing that.
Yeah.
The obstruction of justice charges came from them both lying about making the payphone call and
Right. Yeah, that makes
whatever.
sense.
But in a press conference later that day, police announced the arrest and they say like where those charges came from, but they declined to give any details about why they were arrested for murder and kidnapping and what evidence led to those charges. Tammy and Sydney were both held without bond, and the judge ordered a gag order on both sides of the case. So no one's allowed to talk about it. So we don't hear much. And that was until June of 2014 when Tammy and Sydney were charged with Medicaid fraud. So everything's coming up, all the shit. Allegedly, the two failed to disclose business income on their application and received over $10,000 in benefits that they were not qualified to receive. While awaiting all these charges, bond was later allowed, and Tammy's mom put up her house as collateral. At the bond hearing, the prosecution confessed that there was no evidence directly linking Tammy and Sydney to Heather's disappearance.
Wait, what?
They found nothing. There's nothing. They arrested them. I think maybe they were hoping one of them would turn on each other later, and months
Yeah.
later they hadn't.
What they should have done in this situation is charge them for the obstruction of justice and like the indecent exposure. And
Hmm.
then while they're in custody, are hopefully finding evidence of the kidnapping and murder.
And I
That's how
guess,
it's supposed well, not supposed to, but that's what usually police will do.
yes. So Heather's family testified at this hearing about the harassment and threats coming from Sydney, Tammy, and their supporters. In the end, the judge granted the bond, but on the condition that the two wear GPS monitors, stay at least 5 miles away from the Elvis home, and they are not allowed to contact them in any way. The whole thing was obviously big news in the Myrtle Beach area, and due to this, the court allowed the couple to move to Florida, where Sydney had gotten a job, because obviously they couldn't really find work. Everyone hates them. They still had to meet bail conditions and had to agree to waive extradition back to South Carolina if they did violate these conditions. So they moved off to Florida like the rest of the criminals. Side note, Tammy was a big Disney adult.
That's just a no, I don't want to say that's a red flag, but that's definitely something you should mention.
So I don't think Florida was a coincidence.
No, I don't think so either. I was going to ask you where do we know where in Florida?
I don't know where they ended up, but I know throughout this whole story, they go to Disney like 3 or 4 times for
Okay.
several weeks at a time.
Yep, 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 yep.
So while in Florida awaiting trial, a big development dropped. The prosecutor dropped the murder and the indecent exposure charges for each of them, and the obstruction of justice charge for Tammy. They have zero evidence as to where Heather is, if she's alive or not. There's no murder weapon, there's no blood, there's absolutely nothing. And Tammy and Sydney are not turning against each other. So the charges were dropped without prejudice, which means they can be charged with them later. And reporters did ask Heather's family how they felt about the decision. And while they were reluctant, because we can obviously see what went down, everyone knows what went down, they understand that in order to really nail the one chance they have, the prosecution needs more.
In our podcast, we rule with the justice system and how there is proof for literally all the decisions 98% of the time. So if they dropped the charges, there's reasons for the charges being dropped.
It means they have not shit. So with the murder charge dropped, the prosecution ended up splitting all the other charges and tried Tammy and Sydney separately. We have quite a few trials to go through. The first trial was the state versus Sydney for kidnapping in June of 2016. The prosecution went over all the phone data and CCTV footage. They even took the jury to the boat launch and to Sydney's house to really nail in how close the two were. Bree, the roommate and friend, also testified about the phone call she got from Heather to show that Sydney had asked her to meet up that early morning. The defense's strategy was to basically show how circumstantial everything was and also to place blame elsewhere. They said Heather was having family issues and might have run off. They also said that Heather had a physically abusive ex-boyfriend. It could have been him. After a few days, the jury was sent to deliberate. and they only did so for 7 hours. And when they returned, there was no decision. The jury was deadlocked. 10 of the jurors wanted to convict, and two absolutely did not. In the end, the judge declared it a mistrial. On a positive note, I guess, Sidney did end up going back to jail because he violated the gag order twice during the trial.
Yeah.
On the second day, he spoke to the media outside, and then he did it again after the trial. He was sentenced to 5 months in jail for the contempt, but he only ended up serving 2 months. The next trial was Sidney's for the obstruction of justice charge, stemming from him lying about making the payphone call. All the same information came up, nothing new. Tammy's cousin testified that after Heather disappeared, Sidney showed him a photo. The cousin didn't say what the photo was. He just indicated that Sidney knew more about the case than what he was letting on. And we didn't figure out what this photo was until March of 2021 when prosecutors appeared on a Dateline episode to say the photo appeared to be a deceased Heather with blood on her shirt and scratches on her face.
I'm sorry. Can't you also now be charged with obstruction of justice for not turning in something like that? Or no, I guess he did. Well, did he?
So I couldn't figure out if anyone actually had this photo.
Right.
They said it appeared to be, so I don't know if they saw the photo at all or
Yeah.
if this is just what the cousin told them the photo was. But imagine if they had the photo, well, there's your murder and kidnapping charge.
Right.
But then that never comes up. So I think maybe they don't have the photo.
Where did the cousin say he saw the photo?
Apparently, he said Sydney showed it to him.
Okay, so
What?
they would have had Sydney's phone.
Yeah, they took all their electronic.
1,000%. Yeah.
They had their little public rendezvous photos.
And people, remember this. Whatever you do on your phone, if you're ever in trouble with the police and they are going to look through your phone, it does not matter that you deleted things.
Nope.
Technology is everything you do technology wise is saved somewhere. So if he deleted that picture, they would have found the picture.
Exactly. So maybe the picture doesn't even exist.
Yeah,
Who
we don't
knows?
know. I guess we don't know. We won't know. Weird.
So the obstruction of justice trial lasted 3 days, and in the end, Sidney was finally convicted. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, which is the maximum. In November of 2018, Sidney's parole application was unanimously denied, and in 2019, his appeal was upheld and then denied by the South Carolina Supreme Court. He's gone through 2 trials by now. Tammy has refused to testify at either of them
I mean,
on his behalf. But then Sidney starts divorce proceedings against her because she didn't testify on his behalf at the trials. So now they're split up.
I don't know what's happening anymore.
But I mean, spoiler alert, they never once flip on each other, even after all this shit.
That's what I'm like, they're not turning on each other, but they're not helping each other either.
No.
Yeah. They're just not saying shit, which is kind of smart.
I guess, yeah, because obviously I think this was both of their doing. They know
Supposedly.
allegedly.
Allegedly.
If one flips on the other, they're going down too.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So we have one last trial, at least for now, hopefully. In April of 2018, a grand jury indicted Sidney and Tammy on a single count of conspiracy to kidnap. Not quite kidnapping, but we're getting close.
Yeah.
If you're confused about the difference, conspiracy to kidnap is planning to kidnap someone. They can't prove that Heather has been kidnapped at this point. So they're trying to show Sidney and Tammy at least planned to do it.
Yeah. Which is still a big charge.
Yeah. So they had separate trials, but I'm going to focus on Tammy's because we haven't talked about our girl in a minute. Her trial began in October of 2018 after Sidney's and lasted 11 days. The story the prosecution was trying to tell was that Tammy became so enraged and jealous when she found out Heather might be pregnant. She either orchestrated all this or played a big part in it, at least being there and helping. We obviously know Tammy went a little crazy when she found out about the affair. Sidney's mom even testified against her, and she said that when Tammy found out about the affair, she beat Sidney severely. Tammy's sister Ashley also testified, but to a different tune. She said Sidney had actually gotten that crotch tattoo a year before he had even met Heather, but we don't really know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's got to be receipts somewhere, but
where's the tattoo artist? Why is he not
not
testifying?
Yeah, come forward.
Sister also said that Tammy didn't handcuff him to the bed out of punishment. It was a sexual thing.
I was also kind of thinking about that when you said that earlier. I was like, oof, how do we know the truth?
But Tammy said in her interview with police early on that it was punishment for the affair.
Oh, so why would you lie about that?
The sister Ashley said she was the one who was watching their kids that night. Ashley said it wasn't weird. The kids were homeschooled and they didn't have a normal schedule, which I do think it's weird to at midnight, 1 a.m., call your sister to watch your kids until 3 a.m.
No, 1,000%. That is weird. And just because you're homeschooled does not make any sense.
We don't know for certain if Tammy and Sydney knew Heather could be pregnant. Like, obviously, they went and bought the pregnancy test. I don't think that was for Tammy, but there's we have no recorded conversations between Heather and Sydney and Tammy when she thought she might be pregnant. So I don't know if they like heard it through other people or what.
There's no text.
Nothing.
I mean, it could have been on one of the phone calls.
There was no phone calls since like November 2nd. There was no contact between them until December 18th with the payphone call.
Maybe they saw each other in person. I don't know. Like maybe she
Yeah.
said something in person. That's definitely something we're again not ever going to know about.
No. Sydney and Tammy both stated in their interviews that they were trying to have another child, but then it's like, you're not going to go buy a pregnancy test at 1 a.m. and like have your sister watch your kids in order to do that.
I get now. I will say, if you think you're pregnant and you want to find out immediately, sure, you can go and buy one at 1 a.m. That might be, I
Okay,
could
but like,
see doing that, but you already have other kids. Like I would have done that if it's like my first time kid.
but then also it's like send one of you out to the store.
Right. You're right. You're right. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That actually makes more sense. Why would the both of you guys have to go? And why can't the kids come with you?
Yeah, and Tammy didn't take the pregnancy test at Walmart. She didn't even go inside.
Yeah. You would have gone and peed in that Walmart
Yeah, if it was that urgent.
if it was out urgent. Yep.
In her interviews, Tammy also said they had an open marriage and the affair wasn't that serious. If you remember, Sydney did tell Heather that Tammy had a little boyfriend, and she did make that Facebook post saying she had a boyfriend. Tammy reiterated all this, but in her interviews, police showed a hotel receipt that Heather had gotten that she had gotten for her and Sydney, and Tammy became visibly upset, kind of realizing it was more than what she had thought it was. And so this came up in the trial along with texts Tammy had sent her little boyfriend. The defense moved for a mistrial, saying these scandalous texts were prejudicial. But then on the other hand, the defense was like, well, this proves that Tammy wasn't that mad about the affair because she had a boyfriend as well. So the judge was like, do you want them in the trial or not?
Right.
They were allowed. Tammy did take the stand and said her and Heather were actually on good terms. Everyone was moving on. She said they actually had a good conversation about a month before Heather disappeared. She also said it wasn't possible to handcuff Sydney to their bed because it was a sleigh bed. So there were no like posts or rails or anything to handcuff him to.
Isn't she the one that said that to begin with?
Yes. No one would have never known about that unless she said
It
something.
wasn't even in a detail that was of importance.
No, but it's keeping me up at night.
Yep. I want to know why.
The defense also had a bombshell they presented, or so they thought. They found one of Heather's exes, and he came to testify that he saw Heather at a bar on the 20th. So after she supposedly disappeared.
Okay.
Prosecution, they obviously know that he's going to testify about this.
Yeah.
They get security footage from that night
As they should have.
at that
Yeah.
bar.
Yep.
It was not Heather. And they played it in court, and the ex was like, I guess you're right. It wasn't her.
Okay. You're like, great. And the defense is like, shit.
Yeah.
We did all this work for this dude to just be drunk and not even know it was his ex-girlfriend.
Yeah. So Heather had tattoos. She had a couple big ones. This lady, no tattoos. After both of their trials, both Sydney and Tammy were found guilty. Tammy was sentenced to 30 years for both obstruction of justice and kidnapping to run concurrently. Her projected release date is May 9th, 2043. Sydney was sentenced to another 30 years on top of his other convictions, making his projected release date March 31st, 2044. In October of 2024, Tammy's appeal was denied, and they both remain in custody. To this day, no one has been convicted for the murder of Heather Elvis, and her remains, if they're out there, have not yet been found. Every month on the 19th, the Elvis family hold a vigil at the Peachtree Landing boat launch. And for her birthday, they hold a community event to raise awareness for not only her case, but other missing people in the county. The family is obviously heartbroken at the loss of their daughter, sister, and friend, but they keep the Find Heather Elvis Facebook page very active. They regularly post updates and events they're throwing. So I recommend checking it out, especially if you're in the Myrtle Beach area. They throw a lot of events. And I do have one last thing to share. Before we wrap up, in March of 2016, a man in DeLand, Florida found human remains alongside I-4 between Daytona and Orlando, if you're not aware of where I-4 is. The remains were described as not recognizable, but within a trash bag were remains in a pink bathrobe, curtains, and homemade Mickey Mouse print bed sheet. Of note, Tammy and Sydney, Disney adults, took another vacation to Disney in Florida where they would have had to gone down to Daytona and over to Orlando on I-4 3 weeks after Heather disappeared. So the remains couldn't initially be identified as anyone that the local police knew, but the Horry County Police in Myrtle Beach called them up and testing was done, but no positive identification could be made. So they couldn't rule it was her or not.
How could they not?
I guess it was just
Maybe it was certain bones that you literally just can't.
it was just so decomposed. At this point, it'd be like 3 years in the Florida swamp.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, but there wasn't DNA or evidence or fingerprints or anything on like the Mickey Mouse sheet.
I guess not.
Hmm.
Because
Okay.
they have Tammy and Sydney they're both in custody.
Right.
Like they have their DNA, they have their fingerprints.
Yeah.
There was nothing found on this. And those remains are still unidentified, whether they're Heather or not. And that was the still ongoing and frustrating case of Heather Elvis, who is still considered to be missing.
I went and looked at the Facebook page for her. They literally post every single month.
Yes.
I mean, the mom or the mom or dad, because it doesn't say who it is, but it's someone in the family, or maybe not even mom or dad. Someone in her family posts every month. I saw the visuals that they hold every month, but also, I mean, the last post was on the 19th of January. Like it's a very active and lots of people. I mean, it was hundreds of people that liked it and stuff like this. So they're trying still. I mean, it's a semi-recent case, but also it's been a hot minute.
Yeah, I guess 12 years.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I feel like we know what happened, but it's still like, what the fuck?
Yeah. And will there ever be more evidence found?
I mean, two things positive ID on her remains, or
Yeah.
Tammy and Sydney flip on each other,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I don't know if they would, even if they're divorced now, because I mean, they're
Yeah,
in
they're on
prison
the
for a bit, but they're
Yeah.
still going to have time after prison to live.
Yeah. And I feel like if one turned on the other, there would be then evidence that they both did it.
Yeah, like I
You
don't
know?
think if one of them turned on the other, they're the one that turns is not going to get completely off.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
no way.
I'm curious about their cars and the DNA found inside the cars. Like the fact you would think fibers or something. I don't know. I just feel like we are in such a technology age, and especially like 2013, there was 100% technology for tracking DNA and whatnot. And I just feel like there would be something somewhere.
I know they did search his truck.
Yeah.
There's nothing. These people, they're just good at cleaning up, I
They're
guess.
good, but they're not because their house is a pigsty. Like they flipped on their stories, said like things that didn't make any sense. They went and searched their home and it was a shithole, but yet they found stuff to charge them, but then they didn't find stuff to charge. I don't know. This is weird. I 100% believe that they did it. Don't get me wrong, but I don't understand any of the evidence in this case.
No, and I
Or lack
guess
there.
investigators, if they do have anything, they're not saying shit until something could be done about it.
Which I
So
understand.
so there could be more, but maybe just not enough.
Yeah. And this definitely, you'll have to keep us updated on this case because this is one that we could potentially get updates
Yeah.
at some point. Myrtle Beach, you guys.
Dirty Myrtle, watch out. Spring
Dirty
break coming up.
Myrtle. Yeah. Be careful. I got my belly button pierced in Dirty Myrtle.
That seems like something that would happen there, but I did not expect that from you.
No. And I was actually much later in life. I think I was like 16 or 17. It was much later than I feel like the normal girl snuck to get
Oh,
her belly button pierced.
oh, I feel like that's a normal age. I
Oh, really? Oh, I was thinking like freshman year of high school. People probably did it. I don't know. But and it wasn't like I wasn't sneak in or doing any of it. Like, I think I told my mom too. I was with my two cousins, Christina and Ola, and we all just went and got it. We were in Myrtle together. I think they were there doing something and I drove down to see them for like a day or two. It wasn't like a party thing. And then
Hmm.
we were like, let's go get our belly button pierced. And when I went to go, I remember this. When I went to go get it pierced with them, the place that we did it at, I didn't lie down. It was like a standing. It
No.
it was a it was a normal table, but it also went up. And so I'm like kind of leaned up against it while the person does it. And I'm like, wait a minute, shouldn't I be lying down? Because what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen?
You're gonna pass out.
And I passed out. Of course I did. I mean, so, and I remember passing out, or I passed out, and apparently the person caught me. And I remember like Christina and Ola being like, yeah, you would have hit your head really badly. And I'm like, I don't, now I'm kind of confused on why there was a standing table. That didn't make any sense now that I think about it.
Was
But I also didn't keep my belly button piercing in more than a year.
that was my next question, was how long did that last?
Oh, probably not even, maybe a year, maybe not. But is it a decision I regret? Not really. I'm very fortunate that, knock on wood, when I got pregnant, my little belly button hole did not do what a lot of women's pregnant bellies like
Oh,
holes do, because
the turkey timer?
yes, like they expand. They like it always, it's not the best look. It looks like it can rip. Mine didn't do any of that. So I got really lucky, but maybe it's because I barely kept mine in.
That's good.
Yeah.
I'm so fortunate I did not get my belly button pierced. I
I'm
heard
kind of shocked about that.
I heard horror stories. I don't know, I've never been a piercing girl. I've only ever had the second hole, which I let close after like a year or two. Like I didn't have anything else.
I don't know why I didn't know that. I feel like in the back of my head, you would 100% be into piercings.
Well, here's my thing, because I rode horses and some of the girls had their
Ah,
belly buttons pierced.
yeah.
I heard
Well,
horror stories about it
mm,
ripping.
yep. That would make sense.
And then because we have to like have our hair up under the helmet, you wore a hairnet. So the people that have like
Yeah.
the cartilage piercings, that would rip out too.
Yep. I could see that.
So I didn't do that.
I remember soccer, you couldn't wear them. So you would have to put like those clear inserts in instead.
Yeah.
But that's so weird. I could see you as a piercing girl. Have I have done most of my piercings.
Yourself.
Yes. So in like college or early college, I don't know if if you look up close, I've got lots of holes in my ear, and I used to wear like all the earrings and stuff. It's mainly on my left ear, but I still have some here too. Me and my cousins, man, Ola and Christina, we just learned how to pierce ourselves. You put ice cube, an ear behind, or no, an apple behind the ear, get it numb. Didn't hurt that bad. Really cool. Never got infected. Knock on wood. Very lucky on that part. But now I don't. I haven't put more than my normal earrings in 10 years. You know.
Single one. I wish Holly was here because I completely forgot about this until now. After the barrister's ball, we go back to Holly's apartment and we're both, very intoxicated. I pierced Holly's ears on the bathroom floor.
No, you didn't. How do I not? How did I not know this?
I
Wait,
completely
this was recent.
I completely forgot about it until just now. I remember her like I only have like snippets of memory of that night, but I remember her laying like on the floor like this and I pierced her ears.
Wait, okay. Questions. So, first of all, this was very recent. This was within the past few years. You guys were drunk. That's always a great sign. Did you
Mhm.
use a needle? Like, what did you?
I don't remember. It might have
Okay.
just been the earring.
Oh my God. Earrings are not sharp.
I need to ask Holly because like I completely forgot about this. I need to ask her how long it was there, if it's still there. Maybe
And
she
you did both ears.
I don't remember. Maybe she remembers
Okay.
more than I do.
Hopefully it was just one because if you try to do both, you know they ain't even.
Oh, there's no way.
No.
Drunk ear piercing?
Did you put like ice or apple or any of like,
Couldn't tell you.
couldn't tell you. Wow. Okay. This is good. I had no idea. Didn't know this.
I'm also very fortunate that I did not let her convince me to let her pierce my ears as
Yeah,
well.
what the hell, Kai? I feel like you're like, if someone's like, I'm gonna do this, you're like, I'll do it for you, but hell no, are you touching me?
I'm glad I held out strong because I was definitely in a vulnerable state.
That would have been, yeah. Oh, I'm so curious to find out if that ever
Oh,
got infected.
I'll ask. And with that, Thanks for listening to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. We'll see you next week with another case. Don't forget, like, subscribe. If you want to watch us on YouTube, there'll be pictures from the case. If you want to see that beautiful crotch tattoo, it will be there. And bye.
Can't wait to see that tattoo. Bye. Hey, Millie, can you say bye?